Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I'm hoping to keep this quite short, which is probably going to be annoying for some people. The Orchid game and the articles that I put up there, which some people have read, I don't think many people will have read that lot all the way through. I enjoy reading things like that. I store the information away in the background. It's not prominent. I don't need to refer to it every single day, but it's, in my book, it's just nice to know that it's there and I can recall it now and again when I think it might be necessary. Okay? Now, the problem was yellow patches on some leaves. Yeah? That sparked the problem off. And I dug around and I found those two articles and found them very interesting reading. And in amongst there were some possibilities as to the problem. Yeah. And unfortunately, several possibilities, not just one. But the real problem plant was this antelope dendrobium here, and that has got worse quite quickly. That leaf is now quite bad and is showing pitting, not just discoloration now. And although it started near the base, it appeared, it is now starting to get to other parts of the leaves. And you know, some of the deficiencies, you know, specifically said it will start at the leaf tip and work its way round the edge of the leaf. Well, it's not that. You know, it did tend to start more centrally and nearer the base. So you look, you know, you look at that and you think, oh, well, it's more likely to be that then. But when you start talking about deficiencies, there's three types of watering and feeding going on in here. There's what I call the shady characters over here. They hardly get any food. Have they got a problem? No. Right. So we'll discard them. If that's not a problem, I don't care. They're doing okay. And then we've got the mounted orchids. Have they got a problem? No. Right. We then get round to the holy clay pots. Have they got a problem? No. I mean, some older leaves got problems. I mean, you know, these are the oldest pseudobulbs. Those leaves are going to drop. So they're going to completely go yellow. And you could panic and think, oh, nitrogen deficiency, the whole leaf got... No, it's just an old leaf. Not a problem. These are infected leaves. They were there when I got it. So we disregard them. What I'm doing is the process of elimination. Quickly. Scanning. Looking round. So where are the problems then? And we come back to, there aren't many. Oh, some yellowing leaves here. It's the oldest canes. Those canes were there before I got this plant. New canes? Yeah, they're okay. New growths? Older growths? Yeah, they're okay. Totally different type of plant. New growths? Shiny new green leaves? Okay. Older leaves? Okay. Yeah? So there isn't much of a problem, is there? Really? There isn't much of a problem, but this one is. So, process of elimination. First of all, what's changed in here and is it important? Last year, MSU fertiliser, RO water, relatively low levels of feed, but very frequent throughout the growing season. Any problems? Not that I knew of. Right, so then come to this year, what's changed? Well, I continued with the lower level feed for the start of the season into the middle of the season, but what has changed is I was adding a bit of CalMag in. And it's not huge quantities, just a little bit. But then, was there already enough in the MSU fertiliser? And the answer's probably yes, as a general feed. Throughout loads of different types of orchids, in different growing medias and environments, yes, there was probably enough. So maybe a little bit too much. Yeah? And too much of some of those nutrients, those of you that read the articles, can cause problems with some of the others. Maybe. But then some of the feeds were CalMag on its own. And if that was deemed an overdose, probably not when used on its own, but maybe when added to the feed, because it's bumping up the levels of two elements which, having read the articles, if you have, can affect the way that some of the other elements work. But the bit that really was quite interesting from my point of view is this negative and positive ion charges for the different elements, and how the world tries to keep everything in balance in this arena. Yeah, so you got to bear in mind that some elements are taken on board by the plant at quite rapid rates and in quite large amounts. Well, what would that do to that balance, that equilibrium? It's probably going to mess it up for a bit, and the consequences of that are changes in pH, up or down, depending on what's going on. Yeah? So have we got a problem there then? Maybe. But then if it was a problem, would it affect all the plants? No. Why? Because they're in different stages of media, from bare-rooted, yeah, to nearly bare-rooted, mounted orchids. Some have got a bit more moss than others, yeah, some have got very little. So those two could be thought of as almost the same, except for some of the mounts might have quite old moss that could become a little bit acidic when soggy and wet. Yeah, but it dries fast, gets flushed, maybe. Yeah, holy clay pots. What's different about those? They are all in large chunky bark with stacks and stacks of air and a clay pot sucking the water out. Ah, maybe. Hold that thought. And then there's the rest of the pots. Some are in pure bark, some in small bark, some in medium bark, some in large bark, some with some moss. What's the pH like in those pots? It's not going to be high, is it? This is organic media. There's always going to be an element of decay, albeit a tiny amount in some pots, nice shiny new bark, to perhaps a little bit more in bark that's getting a bit older and that may have some moss in with it. So once you soak that media, the water that goes in, like in a flush, the water that goes in is neutral as far as the pH is concerned. Well, it's not going to stay neutral long, is it? Not if there's elements of decay in the pot. It's going to reduce the pH naturally. So even a flush isn't quite what it might seem. Right, going back to the nutrients getting into the roots at different rates and having an effect on pH. What's the magic ingredient? What do all of these elements need to swap with in the plant to be able to take on board, to be taken on board by the roots? It's hydrogen. Not gaseous hydrogen, hydrogen in its liquid form, which is quite a large component of water. So now we step back again and think, what has changed? What has changed is 3 months of intense heat, whereby despite my best efforts, water was going into pots and disappearing incredibly quickly. What would that do to the nutrient solution? The stuff that gets absorbed really quickly, which is mainly the big stuff, yeah, that gets in there okay, but the stuff that takes longer at a slower rate might not have even got the chance to get in there because the pot dried so quick. Getting closer, aren't we? Now, given this aforementioned flipping 3 months of intense heat, what went with that intense heat? Very, very bright light. More light than these plants have ever seen over a prolonged period, combined with the longest days. What does that do to a plant? Dramatically increases photosynthesis. Dramatically increases the transpiration rate. Now, some clever dicks, like quite a few of the cattleyas, if they start losing moisture through the leaves at a dramatic rate, they'll close down to stop that moisture loss. Well, that holds it in the plant for a while. That are good. But where that doesn't necessarily happen in all types of orchids, again, water the plant, moisture taken on board by a nice wet media base that doesn't last long. So what was taken on board goes straight up through the plant and out the top over a prolonged length of day and the intense heat that speeds up the whole process. So sometimes what appears to be incredibly complicated 3 headache tablet jobs is perhaps a lot more simple than was first thought. And I think that plant, being a vigorous grower, chucking out stonking canes, struggled. Now step back again. Why that plant and not so much the others? What was that one in? It never got repotted when I bought it, so it was in the same media. And that bark was pretty good stuff. You know, when I did come to repot it, it wasn't broken down. It did have a bit of moss in the middle of it, if I remember rightly, you know, but not much, you know. But what bark was it? What tree did that bark come off of? We have had problems with certain types of bark not being ideally suited. So maybe that bark, although it was hard, was actually starting to deteriorate in such a way that it was affecting the roots of the plant and the pH in the pot adversely without being able to see it. That's why that one probably got hit the worst, because of what it was in. No proof, no evidence whatsoever, all hearsay. And that's half of the game with the orchids. Half the time you're guessing, aren't you? You can't prove, you know, unless you're going to dissect the flipping plant and do some sort of chemical analysis to find out what's in it and what's not. You can't do it. So back to the simple idea. Nice, well-balanced feed with some quality water, and the plants that need to stay hydrated do so. And when they start drying out a lot faster than you can cope, over a long period of time, that was probably the problem. Yeah? Worrying about pH going up and down and the effects of certain elements being taken out of the nutrient solution faster than others and altering the pH, was that really necessary? Really? As I said, sometimes you have to step back and look at what's okay. And if it's nearly all okay, and there's a few bits that aren't, think, well, what's different about those plants? You know, was it a plant that perhaps got potted in medium bark when it should stay quite a bit moister, and it's just drying too fast? It's not getting chance to hydrate properly, and certainly with the heat and the long days would lose that hydration very quickly. Yeah? What would it leave behind if it's going straight up through the plant and out the top? Well, possibly not a lot. So you can see where you can get a complete deficiency across the board, but probably at different rates for different elements because the plant's losing it too fast. Yeah. So maybe it just comes down to me not keeping up as well as I should. Maybe. Maybe it was an increase of a couple of elements, yeah, that was not really necessary. Maybe. So I'm going to leave it at that. So those that have got their own ideas, fine, I'm happy with that. I've got no proof that what I've just said is even true. But it's based on just observation and how much is wrong and what plants are wrong and what plants aren't, and trying to spot the difference. Now, the mounts get fed at totally, and watered at totally different frequencies. So even during that hot, dry spell, I probably kept on top of those pretty good. Yeah? And I doubt very much whether what they are growing on in the main rather than in would have any dramatic effect on pH one way or the other. Yeah? And again, this lot down here, you know, so there's two of those Restrepias have been in their pots quite a while. The chances are those pots are quite acidic. Well, are the leaves all manky and going wrong? No. That's because they get flushed incredibly often and don't get fed much. So they're always having access to clean water, even though the moisture in the pot may then deteriorate and become more acidic. Yeah, but then it will get washed out again and refreshed with neutral, and the process starts again. So it's always got access to something that isn't acidic. Yeah, so it gets swapped around. That's why they're probably okay. So there we go then. That's my take on it, and I found those articles incredibly interesting, not boring. I love reading things like that. But I wouldn't class it as essential knowledge. I'd class it as knowledge that you can have if you want it. You can read it and forget it. You can read it and store it away. I mean, I've stored away the articles, so I don't, you know, if ever I need to read them again, they're just there. I haven't got to go and look for them again. They're stored. So, but anyway, I'm reasonably confident that this plant was an exception, primarily because it's a very fast grower, and because of what it was in, which was an unknown quantity. Every other plant in here, I know what went into the pot or what is on the mount, and that was the one that I didn't know. And why it got left, I really can't say, but the logic in my mind is just that the bark in the pot looked okay. It wasn't crumbly, it looked clean. Totally different colour to the bark I use, so it obviously doesn't come from the same sort of trees. It was a very pale, medium brown, as opposed to the darkish brown of the Orchiata bark, which is, you know, this is quite a dark colour. When it's wet, it's almost black. But that was a very pale coloured bark, so it was obviously from a totally different tree. And maybe that plant just didn't like what it was in. That will affect how the roots work and how the plant uses what feed and water it was being given. There could have been something just wrong in that pot. Time will tell. It's now in my normal bark. Yeah? And because we've lost the heat now and the days are getting a lot shorter, I can keep on top of my watering. I'm back to normal. Yeah? I mean, we're down to whatever it is, about 14 and a half hours days now. By the end of the month, it's down to 13 and a half. Not 16 and a half. And not boiling hot every single day and not cooling down at nights. All that's gone now. Honestly, I know this is going to sound sad after all what I've said about the flipping weather. I'd like to see a bit of sunshine today. I've had 3 dull days on the trot. I haven't filled these up for nearly a week. They still don't need filling up. They hardly ever come on. So back to a little bit more normality now. And I'm not saying the panic's over, but it is in my mind on the grounds that I have one plant that I don't want to lose that's looking quite sorry for itself. But the new growths aren't too bad. Yeah, there's some paling. But let's hope they now get back to normal. They've had a media change. Their roots are in something that I know and have control over, and they're back into a normal watering program now. And everything in here, because I was a trifle worried, got one of the best flushes it's ever had. It had its normal flush times 2, really heavy on the flushing. So everything's had a flipping good clear out. And since then, because that happened over several days, I wasn't in a rush because the heat's gone. Yeah, Obviously, I've now got to wait for things to sort of dry off a little bit before I can feed them again. But I don't want them to get totally dry. So, you know, I'll get back round to watering. The only thing I've got to water today is the mounts. And probably some of them won't need it. I know this one won't. That's still wet through. Soggy. Slightly damp. Dry. Dry. Very dry. That's new moss. That dries faster. But, you know, looking up round here, I suspect hairy one's still damp. Yeah, slightly damp. My Jenkinsea eye will still be quite damp. And some of these larger ones, yeah, that one's slightly damp. So, you know, if I didn't do them today, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But as I've got nothing else to do, I will do them. So, not such a big deal after all, but get bogged down with a problem on a plant and it can affect the way you look after all the others, especially if you start making changes across the board and you've misdiagnosed what you thought was wrong with your odd plant or two that doesn't seem to behave in itself. If you're not absolutely confident you've found the exact solution, the exact problem, then how can you apply a solution? Your solution could make it worse. And, you know, these, certainly with nutrient deficiencies, some of the descriptions are incredibly similar. And when you start looking at a certain thing not working as well as it should be, can have an effect on other things and make them not work properly. And they may even be combining into multiple problems in the same plant, especially if you start bringing your media into play and the effects the pH can have. You know, you could be misdiagnosing quite easily. And then applying a solution could even make it worse. So try and think across the board. And across the board in here, there isn't really a problem. Anybody who came in here would think, oh, we've got a few yellowing leaves. Yeah, that's the oldest pseudobulb. That's natural. Don't worry about that. Oh, this Miltonia looks a bit pale. It always has been. Probably always will be. They have paler leaves. Like the Miltoniopsis, have this greyish green coloration to them. That's how they are. You know. Cattleyas are nice, bright, mid-green. They're all okay. Say new growths bigger than older growths. Happy with that lot. So sometimes you have to look at what's good, and then if you do see a real problem, isolate the problem in your mind and deal with it on that plant. Don't apply it across the board. I could make major changes in here thinking I'd found the problem with that plant and start messing up all the others. So yeah, we leave it at that then. And as I say, those you don't necessarily need to store those articles away yourselves if you're interested in referring back to them. Just make a note of the video, because they're in the description. Save cluttering up your own computer. But what I usually do is I store the link. I don't store the actual article. It takes up space. I just store the link. I've got little folders in my Google bar thing across the top, and I create folders in there and I just store the links away. So all my orchid related articles that I want to keep are just stored away, tucked away at the top, but only the link, not the article. And occasionally you go back to reread something and the article's been removed and it don't work. So be it. That's the internet for you. Right, see you next time. I suppose what's tomorrow? Sunday. I may do a Sunday morning chat video, but at the moment I have no subject matter. So we'll see how we go. I might just miss a day out for a change. Anyway, see you next time, whenever that might be. Oh, and I did forget to add in that those two articles are geared up to a site that's predominantly hydroponic growing. As opposed to, as somebody commented, how we grow our orchids. But the two extremes are growing in soil and growing hydroponically, i.e. without soil. And in my book, a lot of my orchids are growing a lot nearer to the hydroponic style than they are growing in soil. because none of them are growing in soil. Yeah? Soil has a dramatic effect on things. There's microorganisms and stuff in soil going on and doing stuff. Those are severely lacking in many of the orchid pots and mounts and things, and bare rooted, missing completely. Yeah, so although this isn't hydroponics, they haven't got a constant nutrient flow around their root systems. Yeah, it's closer to that than it is growing in soil. So I effectively exclude the microorganisms processing that can go on in soil-based growing mediums, yeah, because they're in such short supply that they're almost negligible, and in some cases absent. So they're not having an effect to any great extent anyway. And also I forgot to add that, quite honestly, whatever your problem is, the answer will be 42. Google it. Google, what is the answer to everything? And it'll come up with 42. Think on that. See you next time.